Good morning, welcome back. You are watching the broadcast. Now we get into the discussion. And of course, we'll be talking about police brutality in the face of anti-COVID-19 measures laid out by the government, the extent with which that has also caused deep sense of skeptic from Kenyans in regard to the mistreatment of Kenyans in regard to the police across the country who are enforcing the directives issued by the government to contain the COVID-19 spread here in Kenya. Let's now link up as we also engage our guest in studio here on set with Nerima Wako, who is the Executive Director of Echesa Players here in the country, and get her sentiments in regard to what's happening in the country. Good morning, Nerima. I thank you for joining us here on the broadcast.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Good morning, Nerima.
Good morning.
Good morning, Nerima. Are you getting me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, thank you for joining us here on the broadcast. Your time is appreciated, and what a time to have this discussion that pertains police brutality in the face of COVID-19. Just give me your thoughts in regard to a Kenyan population that is having a choice between dying of starvation and dying of illness, or death by illness, or death by starvation. To what extent has the police brutality or cases of police mistreatment in the country adding to the already existing problems that are partly economical?
I think first we need to understand that the population of Kenya, majority of the population is young. So when we're talking about the youth and the average age being 19, and when you have a conversation with an average 19-year-old, most of them do fear the police. So initially we can safely say that when it comes to the police force in our country, there's already a general fear. So when we speak about even Nairobi city itself, where a young person can be arrested for loitering, and then we talk about a pandemic, where the police are to enforce strict regulations to protect young people, of course, young people are not going to feel protected by the people that they fear. But as recently as Saturday in Mathare, young people were being harassed, being caned because they were not wearing masks. The issue isn't about them not wearing masks, it's the availability of these masks. And this is what happens in our country, where we have regulations that are put into law without any implementations before that regulation. So we have a force that doesn't quite understand how to enforce this particular law. We have a population that doesn't understand how to follow this particular law. So we have confusion. And it's even more concerning when we have extrajudicial killings, where we've seen police shoot young people in broad daylight because they're saying, or the sentiments that they belong to a gang. We've seen cases of a 13-year-old recently being shot in his own house. So I would say that it's a difficult situation to be in because we're supposed to trust the police force, but at the same time, they are not necessarily implementing regulations in a manner that is empathetic and in a manner that is rational. We're talking about people caning doctors in areas like Kisii, where his service is essential. So I believe that there are a lot of gaps and loopholes.
All right, you mentioned the aspect about the 13-year-old boy who was shot while on the balcony of their home in Mathare, and which is an informal settlement here in Nairobi County. And equally, there has been, of course, the Kenya police violence that has been a constant feature in the lives of people who live in informal settlement. Take, for instance, the aspect of Carlton Minor, the Leeds University in the UK student who was on holiday here in the country and then shot by police. To what extent will this pose as perhaps the already existing deep infrastructure problem within the police service of seeing young people in slum or informal settlements as the soft targets rather than enforcing what appears to be a safeguard for the country not to have an exponential growth in the number of COVID-19 cases?
Unfortunately, we're going to see more cases occurring. And I say this because, again, when we're dealing with young people who are mainly in the informal sector, a lot of them are outside trying to make a living. So it's going to be difficult for them to stay home during a lockdown. They have to be able to fend for themselves. So they're going to be outside. So because they're outside, they're going to meet with the police forces. And when we have this issue of insensitivity, especially when we're talking about slum areas, where there's the stereotypical notion that every young person belongs to a gang, especially in these areas, and it's shoot before you question. So when we're talking about youth even congregating together is seen as a threat, then it's going to be very easy for police to justify using their guns and killing young people and saying it was a matter of defense and it was a matter of national security. What we need to have is community stakeholders coming together with the police within these communities to understand the situation that we're in. There's a lot of stress. People don't have money circulating. Salaries have halved. Some people don't even have work at the moment. We can say the same for the police force. There's a lot of stress. They are working overtime. When we're talking about a curfew at 7 p.m., that means they are on the roads at 7 p.m., making sure that people are following that curfew. And then they are back on the roads early in the morning again to make sure. So we have people working overtime with absolutely no salary. So when we talk about the stress levels in the community, there's bound to be irrational decisions that are being made. But something that I wrote in an article recently is what happened to Nyumba Kumi? Because as much as we were talking about Nyumba Kumi being an aspect of a social welfare, where it was people understanding their neighbors, people understanding the security of their neighbors, I think this is a matter of that same security. How can we rely on the goodwill of our neighbors and not necessarily on only the enforcement of the police? Because now we're talking about it being a police state and us living in constant fear of following law, not because it's good for us, because we fear that young people will lose their lives if they don't.
All right, Nerima Wako, stay with us because we will continue with the discussion equally as we engage our two other lawyers here on set in regard to the COVID-19 pandemic and the police brutality reports across the country, starting off when the curfew took effect on the 27th of March 2020 in the country and what transpired in the port city of Mombasa County. Ken Echesa is lawyer and he is lawyer and of course a lecturer of law at the University of Nairobi. I appreciate your time. Lugu, thank you for coming on the program. And Nicola Casimir Obiero is lawyer and commentates on law and governance issues in the country. Gentlemen, I appreciate your time. Thank you for showing up on the broadcast. Coming to you first, Ken Echesa Wakili. In the element of course, the bureaucracy, in, of course, enforcing this health crisis, not, of course, to inundate or overstretch the capacity of the Kenyan government in turning out to be a catastrophe, there has been, of course, the police at the epicenter to enforce some of the directives. Has the government then resorted to the most sophisticated arsenal it has in his, of course, reach, which is the police? And to what extent is police brutality causing more worries than even COVID-19 among the public?
I think, Ayub, I'll begin by, of course, thanking you for inviting us here. And it's a good reunion with my brother, Casimiro Obiero. He was my classmate at St. Peter's Mumias Boys High School. That is about 14, 13 years ago. So it's a good reunion. I want to begin by stating categorically that the government of Kenya was not prepared for the curfew. And since it was not prepared for the curfew, the police have used excessive force, of course, because the force had not been, or the service had not been prepared on how to deal with this curfew. This was a unique curfew. It is not a normal curfew that is brought about by, say, a country's instability. It was a curfew brought about by a health pandemic. And there is no reason as to why the police could be justified to use even that which in law we call reasonable force. Reasonable force is used in certain circumstances. Okay. When there is state instability, the police could be justified to use some force which is reasonable in enforcing the curfew. But presently, the police are using unreasonable force. The police force seems to have suspended fundamental human rights and suspended the rule of law. Any curfew must be enforced within the limits of the rule of law, which is respect for fundamental human rights.
Okay, aside from the clear ethical issues, coming to you, Obiero Wakili, there is, of course, the public order powers to implement restrictions given to the Kenya police by the Constitution. And this comes in the management of COVID-19 and perhaps making safe the Kenyan public in terms of ensuring that there is discipline in terms of adherence to the guidelines provided by the Minister of Health. Is this what police is violating, to violate human rights? And is human rights becoming a victim in the face of COVID-19?
Of course. As Ken had just mentioned, I'll just like to echo his sentiments. You realize that amidst the COVID-19 era, we've not had any meaningful training for the police to tell them how to tackle these issues. This is a humanitarian crisis. And when there is a humanitarian crisis, this is something that is sensitive, something that is special, and something that is extraordinary. Have we put in place those extraordinary measures in our police service? No. I will also lay blame to the IPOA. You know, this is the body that is mandated to monitor and oversight policing, the activities of the police. Since 2011, when we had the IPOA Act,
yes, the establishment.
Yes, number 35 of 2011, so far it has been a toothless dog. We have not seen meaningful measures taken by IPOA to check the excesses of the police. So it all goes, the buck stops with the IPOA. Basically, the police are doing this because they know that their powers cannot be checked. And who can check them? First, IPOA. Okay. There are other state actors which have also failed. In your earlier updates, I've seen Chief Justice Maraga saying that the courts will not be upscaled. You know, at the end, for you to check the police, the judiciary must also be working. Our judiciary is not working. Okay. Even though the Chief Justice said that we are upscaling, we are not upscaling, but you are going through technology, but it is not working. So we cannot check the police. And I lay blame to our judiciary and our other state actors because they are not working at all. Of course, somebody will say that there was no time, this was an emergency, but in times of emergencies, you also need urgent measures. Okay. The urgent measures have not been taken.
You have mentioned a very critical institution, which is IPOA, established under the 2010 Constitution.
Yes.
And from a paltry budget of about 96 million in the 2012-13 financial year to 800 million in the 2018-19 financial year. And the only achievable or tangible thing that IPOA achieved is the purchasing of 27 motor vehicles and more than 5,000 cases unresolved. We'll come to that aspect and the needed police reforms in the country. And before I cross over to Narima, Wakili Echesa, coming to you. In the understanding of course, this entire context, it is the police that the government is using under the Ministry of Interior to ensure that there is modification of behavior to adhere to the guidelines provided. But how does the police service, because we are not a police force no longer, make that or create that awareness between them and the people that the enemy is not you, the enemy is the virus, and perhaps pull back on some of these excesses that the police are using on the common mwananchi?
And I'll begin from where my brother Kashmir left. We are transiting from a force to a service. When we transit from a force to a service, there is need to do some induction to the officers who have been serving under the banner of a force. Most of our police officers no longer understand that there is a difference between the previous police dispensation and the current service we are having. We are supposed to have a friendly police service that resonates with the common man. And secondly, the police have to understand that from 2010, we have a more vigorous, a more informative, a more progressive constitution that must be respected. And Ayub, we have in this country a piece of legislation called the Judicature Act, which is giving us the order of the laws and how they should be applied in this country. By dint of Section 3 of our Judicature Act, the hierarchy of the laws is that the Constitution is at the supreme, followed by Acts of Parliament, then the substance of common law and doctrines of equity. Then we have some statutes of general application in force in England on 12th August 1897, and then African customary law. Meaning, what the minister is doing or what other players are doing, they are coming up with what we call subsidiary legislation. They are at number 3 of our hierarchy of laws. And when you look at Article 2 of our Constitution, and specifically paragraph 4, it is couched in clear terms that no law, including customary law, that is any law, including customary law, that is inconsistent with this Constitution shall be void to the extent of the inconsistency. And I'm afraid to say that the manner in which our present regulations are being enforced by the police is being done in an inconsistent manner with the Constitution and particularly the human rights.
All right. And of course, it's very important that you have mentioned human rights. And there is a system of perhaps what appears to be an already broken system of policing around the world. And it is also very evident in India, in South Africa, and other countries across the world. We'll come to that aspect because it's a very expansive topic. But let me now link up with Narima, who is also standing by for us for that important element. Narima, will I be right in terms of my judgment to say that it's counterproductive, it's self-defeating for the government to use the police to address a health issue, which in the end might turn out to be even bringing about more complicated issue for the government to handle in terms of the healthcare crisis for COVID-19?
I wouldn't say that it's counterproductive. I think, unfortunately, culturally, we are a country that is policed a lot. I say this because even when we think about our examinations for Class 8, we are completely comfortable with having police or the military present at schools and watching 12-year-olds doing an exam and making sure that they are not cheating. So when we talk about that and we see that we utilize force during examination, so we're talking about education, so why wouldn't we use them during health? So I think that as a country, we've sort of grown used to the idea that we need to be watched to be able to obey. And I can say that even when we see Nairobi City, for instance, when we look at traffic lights, people don't necessarily obey them unless they see a police officer standing somewhere at a corner and they feel that they need to follow the lights. So I do think in a sense, we have grown up to understanding that without the police, then we won't follow. And even with this enforcement that we're talking about, we're still seeing people completely ignoring curfews. And we're not talking about ordinary individuals. In Nyeri, we saw MCAs. We're seeing people who are supposed to understand this law and follow this law, going against that law. And they're supposed to be living by example. So I wouldn't say that it defeats the purpose. I would say that there is a need for the police force in a sense, because we've culturally grown up to need them. But I do believe that there's a sense of sensitization that is lacking, where we now see the police dealing with people as if they are children, where you're caning individuals and not necessarily trying to understand the matter or the occurrence. Because when we have a young woman who died in labor over the weekend because people were too afraid to go outside and take her to the hospital. So she died in labor in her own home.
Okay.
So that, I think, is where the discrepancies lie.
When CS Mutahi Kagwe, who of course is at the forefront of the updates, the regular updates in regards to COVID-19 in the country, was challenged in regard to the police brutality, he said, I quote him, "Don't make it difficult for the police to come into contact with you." Is this perhaps an admission that the government is seeing human rights violations which are against the Constitution and illegal as a secondary issue, even in the fight against the pandemic?
I believe that they are, and I also believe that CS Kagwe has made sentiments that have been taken absolutely the wrong way, even what he said about young people. And again, it goes back to how we culturally speak to one another, where he's now speaking to us, like I mentioned, as if we are children. So I do believe that it doesn't seem as a priority right now. They don't want to really talk about human rights. What are rights when there's a virus happening and this virus can kill us all? We should be caring about how can we contain the virus, and then your rights come second. And this is not just an issue that is happening in Kenya. And that's why we're seeing a lot of developed countries concerned. I mean, in the US, people are going on strike because they feel that their rights are being violated because they cannot work. So I think that each country is dealing with it differently. And I truly believe that if we do not understand how we are as a people, then we cannot communicate to the people properly. And I think that's something that the Ministry of Health is completely failing in. How to communicate. Not communicating in a sense where you're instilling fear, where you're forcing people to follow the law because of a spread of a virus, but allowing people to understand that it's for their good. And we're doing this to protect you. So I'll say that in the aspect of human rights violations, they're going to increase. We're going to see domestic violence increasing as well. And the presence of a hotline, because CS Margaret Kobia announced that there's going to be a hotline, is not something that is a solution for us.
Okay.
There are still women who are going to be kicked out of their homes today due to domestic violence, due to the stress of the economy right now.
Okay, and we'll of course be continuing the discussion. Of course, you'll be staying up for that. Wakili Echesa, if I may come to you then, there's the aspect about many Kenyans never thinking post-2010, when we promulgated the Constitution on the 27th of August 2010, that some elements of life will be policed by the Kenya Police or the government largely. But now it's more or less what appears to be a shrinking freedom of space in terms of our democracy, in terms of the freedom of expression movement because of the imposed measures by the government. And life is on hold generally. But how does the government then differentiate between the qualitative difference between suppressing, modifying a behavior for guidelines to be followed and ensuring that they reduce the risk of the COVID-19 pandemic on the same population?
Ayub, if our government or the enforcers of these regulations were to understand our constitution, will not be having these problems. Kenyans ought to understand that some of these rights are not absolute. Some of these rights are qualified, like the freedom of movement. It is qualified. Freedom of association, freedom of speech. What you say, what you do can be controlled by government in favor of the public. However, the government also ought to enforce these regulations, putting in mind the provisions of Article 25, which makes it impossible to limit some rights.
Okay.
Protection from torture, inhuman treatment, and slavery, for example, cannot be limited under whatever circumstances. Not even at the worst phase of coronavirus can you subject human beings to cruel and inhuman treatment. What we've been witnessing in some parts of this country is actually torture. Kenyans have been subjected to torture. Kenyans have been subjected to inhuman treatment. This tells you that the government either does not understand that some rights cannot be limited, or it understands and it has chosen to ignore. Effectively, the work of a police service is to maintain law and order. And maintaining law and order does not mean meeting unnecessary force on the citizens. Maintaining law and order must be in the right frame of our legal provisions.
Okay.
And why I told you, Ayub, that the country was not prepared for this curfew, for example. We are now fighting as a continent and as a nation against congestion.
Okay.
We are trying to decongest people. You arrest about 70 people overnight, dump them into one police cell. What are you going to achieve? Don't you think that the virus is going to spread?
When there's already a plan by the judiciary to decongest our prisons.
Yes, and decongest our prisons, but then the police cells are being congested. How are we achieving?
Okay, it's more or less, I mean, a problem after another problem, supplementing the already existing problem. Wakili, Obiero, in a constitutional setup like Kenya, which is a democracy, how do we preserve some aspects of liberty which are guaranteed by the Constitution, even in the midst of these curfews and the restrictions of movements?
It all goes to the culture of our people. It is also sad that even though we are saying that the police are using a lot of force, let us also look at our culture. Are we as a people disciplined? Are we following the directives of the government? Are we also following that same constitution? Are we following the rules that have been placed by the MOH? For instance, you walk in our streets, in our residential places, especially Nairobi, these evenings, you will get people still walking past 7. You'll get people closed in bars, in wines and spirits.
Okay.
So you ask yourself, are we also a people with a culture of following the rules? So the moment we are not a people with discipline, the police will meet us at the center and will create friction. So the buck also stops with the people. can we be a people who follow the same constitution that we want our police to follow, we want our government to follow? For instance,
All right.
look.
Is it then, Wakili, a double tragedy here for
Yes,
the
it's
government?
a double tragedy.
In regards to, because you have mentioned a very important element as to why people don't understand why they should be at home and as to why the police are here in terms of enforcing a guideline.
Yes, let us not look at these guidelines as punitive.
Okay.
Let's look at these guidelines as things that are going to help us rather than destroy us. Let us look at the police also as our brothers. At times, the excessive force is used as a retaliatory mission by the police. How many times have we seen our youth in our informal settlements throwing stones at the police? How many times have we seen people even abusing the same police that you want them to protect? So if we don't realize that they are also human, it's automatic that it will be a double tragedy.
Of course, and that creation of course, a breakdown between the public and the police, who ought to be cooperating on the important element of better policing services in the country.
That is it.
My lawyers will be coming to you. Let's now engage our other analyst who is on set. Nerima Wako is standing by, and thank you for joining us here on the broadcast and staying patient. Now, according to media reports, and of course, as incorporated, by October 2018 and September, between October 2018 and September 2019, about 1 year, the Kenyan police killed 189 people. The average of the age of those killed is 28, and 75% of these cases, the police allege the victims were criminals and thugs, even when there is compelling evidence to the contrary. Will this go unchallenged even when the dust settles on COVID-19 in the country?
I don't believe it will go unchallenged. There are organizations such as Amnesty Kenya, Machozi ya Jana, by Giuliani, who've been pushing for these issues to be highlighted. Because even you will find, even in that data, it was difficult to find. Because a lot of times when media was reporting who was killed, no names were mentioned. And a lot of times they're reported as figures. And that's because they were using it to hide the fact that many of those cases were extrajudicial killings and they could not be proven to be related to gangsters and things like that. So I think that we need to understand that when we talk about young people in informal settlements, and when I mentioned earlier, the fact that loitering can lead to arrest, the number of young people who, because the work that I do in the organization that I work for is working specifically with young people. And a lot of them, their general fear is meeting the police, even if it's walking down the street, because the first thing that they ask you is your identification without nothing, just walking and they ask you for your ID. And a lot of them, especially in Eastleigh, they fear that and they do not step outside because of that. So when we talk about a general population that has a fear for the police, it's concerning. And that fear does not come from nowhere. When we talk about Carlton being murdered, a university student who was visiting in Kibra and he died after just playing a video game. That shows you the extent of these massive killings that happen in these settlements. So I think that it's a concern that's growing for many human rights defenders, not just in Kibra, Mathare, but Dandora, Kamkunji as well, Eastleigh as well. And I think it's a good cause because the police need to realize that these individuals belong to our family. Because a lot of those campaigns is to show where these individuals come from, the families they belong to, and they're just not somebody that you can shoot and get rid of and hope that this dies away and goes.
All right, even as you mentioned that, it's important, one final question before I let you go, that the government, of course, me, you, and the lawyers here, and Kenyans know, failed to act decisively in ensuring that COVID-19 does not reach home. And you recall the 239 passengers who were on board Chinese flight. The government shrouded the entire exercise in secrecy. The Kenyan who shot the video allegedly was charged for terror-related issues, a case of self-fulfilling prophecy from the government. Later, of course, he was vindicated. And then here comes the same government uses police to enforce the guidelines that it wants Kenyans to adhere to. The same guidelines are now violated by the police. So how do we then act with caution and consideration, even as we want in some large capacity as Kenyans, and by extension many Kenyans and African countries, to walk out and navigate the corona waters in the continent and here in the country with regards to human rights violations, upholding the rule of law and the rights and the liberty guaranteed by the Constitution?
I think the government did make a mistake with the flight, the 239. actually had a friend who was on that flight. And the thing that he mentioned to me that still rings clear today, he put himself in isolation for 14 days. He did that on his own. But I'm sure there are individuals who didn't. So it's the individual responsibility to do the best that you can to isolate for those of us who can. But also to understand that that was not the only flight on that day. There were several others. That was the only flight directly from China. He had mentioned that there were classmates of his, because he was in university in China, who had come that same week, hundreds, just traveling through Europe. And those are the things we don't realize. That people were still coming into the country. Where a lot of us were afraid of that one flight from China, but in that 1 week, there were hundreds who came into this country with the virus. So at the end of the day, we could blame the government as much as we want. They are doing their part. They are trying to do their part. But we can also see countries like China that were refusing to share data and information, including the fact that they had Chinese travel by taking medication to reduce their temperatures to pass borders.
All right.
We're talking about the number of people who've died, and we're not sure about the figures. So the only thing that we can do is take care of ourselves, but not necessarily constantly blaming the government, because we're going to waste a lot of time. They will continue to show themselves as blameless.
All right. Asante sana Nerima Wako. Thank you so much for your time here on the broadcast. And what a time to discuss a very important issue which regards many Kenyans, which is a constitutional affair, and how to uphold that right, which of course belongs to many Kenyans in regard to COVID-19. Thank you so much and good afternoon. Asante sana. And thank you to you too. We are taking a short break here on the broadcast. When we come back, we'll continue with the discussion with our two lawyers on set. Of course, it's an expansive topic. We'll be taking a look at IPOA's progress, the first team in office, what they have managed to achieve, the cases that cropped up ever since 2013, up to when the first team has exited the scene, up until now, what has been addressed and what lies ahead forward for the Independent Policing and Oversight Authority in the country. The number is 0791478990. The hashtag on Twitter, NewDayKE. The short SMS code is 40920. Stay tuned. We're coming back after the break here on the broadcast. You're watching the broadcast. Thank you for staying with us here on the program. You're watching Ebru Television. It's afternoon and noon. We are celebrating the healthcare workers who are on the front line in the battle against COVID-19 pandemic in the country. Of course, the government is coming up with measures to ensure that they don't become patients, even as they attend to Kenyans or even foreigners who are affected by the pandemic here in the country. We are taking time to appreciate them. We are taking time to say thank you for sacrificing their lives, for ensuring that they stand up to time, they stand up to the pandemic, and they keep us safe here on the broadcast. And equally, this is of course a live broadcast that includes also our other workers who are stationed outside the studio in association of the healthcare workers. And we say thank you to our nurses, thank you to our doctors, thank you to the healthcare providers who are part and parcel of this entire fight against the pandemic in the country. And what we're seeing on the screens are the staff here on every television who have managed to come outside our studio in our compound to ensure that we celebrate our healthcare workers. We say thank you. We say asante sana. We say thank you so much for sacrificing your lives, for dedicating your time, for being at the forefront, for being our frontline soldiers in the fight against COVID-19 pandemic in the country. It's an appreciation, but of course this afternoon is also live broadcasted on other media outlets and stations across the country, across the landscape. We are celebrating the men and women who are on the front line in the fight against COVID-19 pandemic. Thank you so much. Your time is appreciated. Your selfless, of course, worthy time is appreciated. Thank you so much. And we say asante sana to our healthcare workers and providers in the country in the fight against COVID-19 pandemic. Thank you. Thank you so much. Good afternoon. Welcome back. You're watching the broadcast. We are into the last segment of the program here discussing police brutality in the country in the wake of COVID-19 pandemic and the concerns raised by Kenyans in regard to mistreatment, harassment, and of course, force meted on them by the Kenya police in the country. The number is 0791478990. The hashtag on Twitter, NewDayKE. The short SMS code is 40920. Still with lawyers Ken Echesa and Kasmi Obiero here on the broadcast. Thank you for joining us on the program. Now, I was coming to you, Wakili Ken Echesa, before we went on break. It was the issue about bureaucracy and what appears to be the embezzling or the failure by IPOA to tighten the noose on the pilferage in terms of the resources. From the 2012-2013 financial year, in which it was allocated 96 million Kenya shillings. To 2017-18, 800 million Kenya shillings. To 2018-2019, about allocated 800 million shillings. 2017-18, 696, I beg your pardon. 2018-19, 800 million Kenya shillings. Surely, it's not an excuse, or it will be flimsy if IPOA says they have been cash-strapped, isn't it?
Yes. Kenya has become a man-eats-man society. And every person who gets into either public service or into a commission gets an opportunity to take part of his national cake through unlawful means. And IPOA is no exception. There seems to be pilferage or expenditure on activities that are not value-based, activities that are not a priority. Like when you're saying buying of a fleet of vehicles, well, they need movements. They need to be in terms of movement. But how effective is this movement? How productive is this movement? And what is sad is that we have institutions charged with the responsibility of ensuring that IPOA and other commissions spend their budget within the law, and they do so to the benefit of the purposes for which they are established. But since IPOA has been cleared in the past 3-4 years, it also tells you that these institutions have collapsed. Where is Parliament? IPOA presents its annual financial report to Parliament every year. Where are the parliamentary committees such as PAC? And where is the Auditor General? Where is the DCI if we have cases of misappropriation within IPOA? So generally, it's not just a case affecting IPOA, it is a collapse of institutions in this country. And most of our institutions are no longer going concern, as we said before, is that IPOA must be responsible, it must spend within the law, and it must put the taxpayers' money to the best of its use if we have to succeed.
Okay, Wakili Obiero, there's this, it might sound funny, but let's face it. I mean, because it's very important. With that budget, by the end, IPOA acquired only 27 motor vehicles. It's supposed to undertake business across the country. 27 motor vehicles. Mathematically, we have 47 counties across the country. This is shot by about 27 if one county was to get one vehicle each for purposes of logistics and facilitation. And it's on its staff roster, it had 143 employees. The budget is 800 million Kenya shillings. How does such an institution then be the voice that echoes the need of the common mwananchi in terms of getting the complaints and having those complaints addressed in the manner that those who have complained will get justice, so as the ones who have been implicated?
43 vehicles,
27
vehicles.
143 staff.
So one vehicle should serve two counties.
2 counties.
It is actually laughable. And it all goes down to what Wakili Ken is saying. He's talking about priorities. IPOA has not prioritized on what it should have, how it should use its money, and it goes down to other institutions which are also failing us. And it also goes down to the structural organization. Who is this that is advising IPOA? Did they present a budget before they were given this money? And this budget, was it scrutinized? And who scrutinized? And if that person gave an okay, is he still serving this nation? It all goes down to other institutions. Where are the auditors? Before, where are our procurement officers? Before you procure 23 vehicles to serve 47 counties, do we have people who advise IPOA? And if they're there, why are they getting this salary? We must institutionalize a culture of checks and balances. This is an issue of nobody looking at these budgets, nobody looking at them critically and advising them, telling them that this will not work and this won't work. I think some of these institutions that are in the Constitution were hurried rather than getting time, looking at them critically and rolling them down systematically. This was just an institution that was hurried, and as you said, from the onset, it was set to fail.
Okay. Wakili Ken Echesa, then coming to the aspect about, of course, the recruitment process. Let me use the word charade. I mean, unfortunately, the National Police Service Commission and the Inspector General of Police now, Hilary Mutyambai, who is in that capacity, the IG, continue to practice their traditional one-day recruitment exercise where they focus not on intellectual aptitude as a two-tier process envisions, but give prominence to physical attributes. Is that perhaps informing why we have the brutality and cases of police mistreatment of Kenyans?
Yes, it is partly to blame because in some serious jurisdictions, recruitment to police service and the defense forces is based on intellectual ability. We have very many disabled persons in this country, Ayub, who can serve as better police officers compared to some of us who are abled. We have very many people without a single tooth in this country who may serve better in our police stations. But look at the things, the nitty-gritties we consider when we are recruiting people into the police force. One is the height. Is there any scientific proof that height and reasoning are related?
Or the number of teeth?
The number of teeth, the body size.
Urine,
you can, I don't know, you can run up to which level. How often do we see our officers running? Those senior officers, the OCS, the OCPD, some of them are even overweight because of sitting in office. So we need to change our culture and recruit persons into our police service based on merit, on meritocracy, intellectual ability, and avoid these sideshows of height, teeth, I don't know, scars on the body, and so forth. Look at the US. The US goes for its best brains to put to their army and to put into their police force. Kenya, Uganda, and other African states have taken police service as a dumping site for those who are intellectually incapacitated. That is not to say that our police force is generally comprised of intellectual rejectees. I know of police officers who are extremely competent, but then these police officers who are extremely competent and can make rational decisions are a minority within the police service. Their other counterparts are a majority. And when police officers are allowed to be overpowered by a majority who are used to taking orders, we cannot have meaningful respect for the rule of law. It's very interesting at times in my village when you are tackling a police officer and he is citing some sections of the law which was repealed, and he's telling you, no, I know the law, will not teach me. He's citing a law that was repealed 15 years ago. It's very difficult to advise a police officer.
Okay.
As Kenny is saying, just to finish it up, of course, you also need continuous professional training. These police should be trained again and again. How many times have we seen our police being trained on the trending things in our country, the emerging issues on technology, on issues... cybercrime, disaster management. So you also need continuous professional training for the police.
And Wakili, one final word to you too, a general question to you too. Of course, what we want to achieve or strive to get is high caliber of trained professional police officers in the country. The Kenya National Commission on Human Rights, of course funded by the taxpayers, me, you, and Wakili Obiero, released a report in 2016 saying that what the police in Kenya are doing is not to extensively observe the police recruitment continued process and is marred by corruption, serious irregularities characterized by interference from the executive arm of the government, and a total disregard of the two-tier process. Is this disservicing the police service, which is ought to provide service for Kenyans?
Of course it is disservicing the National Police Service Commission. And what is upsetting me, or what is annoying to many of us as a citizenry, is that the National Police Service Commission is among the Chapter 15 commissions that are supposed to be independent, absolutely, at least at the decisional level. However, there is a thin difference in this country between the National Police Service Commission and the national government. In fact, the National Police Service Commission has become a hostage of the national government through the Ministry of the Interior. The IG is not the IG. Actually, the IG sits on the National Police Service Commission. The chairman of the National Police Service Commission is an appointee of the president. We need to have a clear demarcation of roles and functions and a framework of interaction between our national government and our National Police Service Commission. This commission is not supposed to take orders from the executive, is not supposed to implement the executive will. It is independent. Its decisions must be independent. Recruitment into the service, for example, should be based on merit. Let those who qualify, even using their own parameters of height, teeth, and the rest, be taken at that level. But you will see, when they come to in the field, they only take about 7 people. And then other 7 people, if that field had been allocated 14, are letters which are given to senior government officers, members of parliament, senior persons to recruit into the service their relatives. And it becomes very difficult to recruit a police force which is existing on the basis of nepotism.
Okay, yes, Wakili, final word?
My final word is that the police should remember that it is a service and not a force. It should also remember that it should use the brain at most instances and not the brawn. And the police must also remember that they are human. Whichever actions they're taking, they're human before they become the police. Today, that person you're mistreating on the streets without looking at that person will die. But tomorrow it might be your own relative will be on that street. Let the police remember that it's a service to serve the people and not a force as it used to be.
Until that perception. Wakili, thank you. Casimiro Bero, lawyer, and Wakili Echesa, thank you. Let me just wrap things up here and pave the way for our 1 p.m. news team so that they can be able to brief you with regards to other developments in the country. Total COVID-19 confirmed cases around the world, 2,565,059. America accounts for 825,183, followed by Spain, Italy, France, Germany, the United Kingdom, Turkey, all European countries. Iran has overtaken China in terms of the total recorded COVID-19 cases with 84,802, the most impacted country in the Arabian Peninsula. Now, after that, China comes then Russia, Brazil, Belgium, Canada, Netherlands, Switzerland, Portugal, India, Peru, and Ireland. Total confirmed number of deaths around the world, 177,496. The total tests conducted in the United States of America, 4,163,464. New York State accounts for 649,323. It's way above California, Florida, Texas, New Jersey, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, Illinois, and Louisiana, with 649,325. So let's get the coverage done by the CNN in regard to the global mapping of the COVID-19 pandemic. So when I play here, you will see how the COVID-19 was epicentered in the city of Wuhan in Hubei province in China. Now, the map will entirely be reddish, which is an illustration of how it has spread first across the world, now with America becoming the epicenter and the point of attention of the World Health Organization. Africa paltry recorded first cases, and you can see how it's not as impacted as other parts of the world are, but there are concerns on about whether the African healthcare infrastructure can withstand and whether Africa is relaying out the accurate results as needed by the Global World Health Organization. We come to the BBC coverage of the coronavirus data in detail. America leads the way with 43,128 deaths. Now, Italy comes with almost half of that with 24,000. Spain, France, UK, Belgium are all European countries, and they line up in that. And this is, of course, provided by the BBC in the UK. Here is a timeline of how, when it plays here, you can see the differences in regard to the numbers recorded, and China was topping from the onset, but this number is going to drastically change as we come to an end by this timeline, by the end of this timeline, which will be by the 20th or 19th of April. Less than 100,000 cases, but look at the speed at which it's going to be upsurging in terms of the numbers recorded by the World Health Organization. And this study is done by Johns Hopkins University European Center for Disease Prevention and Control. So you can see how it's changing, the bar graph. China becoming number 3. Spain, the US, Italy up. China is going down. France is coming up. Iran, the United Kingdom, Turkey, Belgium. And this is now a totally different picture by the end, as you can see, with the United States of America, 802,707 total confirmed number of cases. So let's take a look at the Johns Hopkins University in regards to the total, the representation in terms of the outlook. America is the epicenter. On the right-hand end of your screen, you can see the reded area, which is perhaps the point of attention that perhaps might have informed the Donald Trump executive order, which now has imposed immigration on the United States of America, which is now, of course, you'll not be allowed to get into the United States of America. A foreign policy he assumed, and that has been his trajectory ever since 2017 when he assumed office in Europe. There appears to be the flattening of the curve in China. The airspace is no more in Africa. The cases are low than other parts of the world, but there are concerns about the capacity of the African continent in, of course, coping up with the COVID-19 pandemic. And here is, of course, the outlook of the mapping in terms of the daily confirmed cases in Africa. This has been updated this morning on the 22nd of April. Africa is led by Egypt, 3,490 cases. South Africa, 3,465 cases. Then Morocco, Cameroon, Ghana, Algeria, Cote d'Ivoire, Djibouti, Tunisia, Burkina Faso, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Senegal, Mauritius, Somalia, Niger, Nigeria, Kenya, Mali, Congo, and the list goes on and on and on. The live update here equally we are providing you is in regard to the COVID-19 pandemic, as regards, of course, this important article, which is subject to discussion on many American media platforms. Coronavirus, of course, presenting many in the world, including China and the United States of America, an ample opportunity in terms of the race for the development of a vaccine, and the superpower race between Washington and Beijing, and the remaking of the world order, and how the world will look like generally post-COVID-19 when the dust will settle on the pandemic, which first started in the city of Wuhan in Hubei province, spread across the world. Now there are accusations on America suing the authorities in Beijing as regards to them underreporting, using lies, cover-ups, and repression in regard to, all, of course, putting the doctor who first raised the red flag on the pandemic in isolation until his death, and why America wants that, of course, slashing the World Health Organization budget. And there are concerns between the United States of America, the UK, and authorities in Beijing in China as to how the Chinese government is buying influence in leading topmost organizations in the UN system and affecting the imbued system in the United Nations since 1950 by the UK and the United States of America. A subject for another day. Thank you for joining us here on the broadcast. We appreciate your time. Thank you to Wakili Echesa, Wakili Casimiro, and thank you to, of course, Nerima Wako, who joined us by way of Skype here on the broadcast in regard to, of course, the police brutality in the country. She is the Executive Director of Siasa Plays. And thank you to you too. Our team will be up next by 1 p.m. in about 15 minutes time, and we appreciate your time. Diana Rachel Mbugo is up next. I see she is here, and she will be here, and she will be with you in a couple of minutes time. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned. We'll see you tomorrow for the Primetime News and News Compass. Good afternoon.